We're less than 2 weeks away from the first presidential debate between President Biden and Donald Trump. Both candidates campaigned this weekend. President Biden raised money in Los Angeles at a star-studded fundraiser featuring a conversation with him and former President Barack Obama. Trump stomped in the battleground state of Michigan, speaking to black voters in Detroit. To help us check in on the state of the race, we're joined by Dan Balz. He is the chief correspondent at the Washington Post. It's great to be with you, Dan. You wrote today about a group of voters that will be particularly important to the 2024 outcome. Can you walk us through, give us a sense of who those voters are that you wrote about?
Yeah, John, and thanks for having me. We know that a relatively few number of people are going to decide this election in 6 battleground states. And we tried to set out to figure out who some of these voters are and what they think. And what we call the deciders are actually a sizable group. It's 6 in 10 voters in those 6 states who have either voted in only one of the last 2 presidential elections or are under 25 and therefore don't have any particular voting history or switched their votes between 2016 and 2020 or have not firmly made up their mind about who they're going to vote for. And what we found, John, was that this group is younger than the average registered voter or those voters who've made up their mind. They are more dissatisfied than the other pool of voters with the 2 major candidates. They are less enthusiastic about this election. They are not paying as close attention. They are less likely to say that this election matters to them a great deal. And more are less likely to think that their vote will really matter. So I think there are a couple of takeaways on this. One is that there are just a lot of people who are still in flux. They may be leaning in one direction or another, but they really haven't firmly made up their mind. And so there's a long way to go in this election at a time when the overall polls have been pretty static. The other is that for President Biden, there are some worrisome signs. One is that this group in general skews a little bit more toward his natural coalition, and that they're younger and they're more non-white than those voters who have made up their mind. And the second is that on a number of issues that they say are the most important to them, they actually think that they favor, or they think that former President Trump would do a better job on those than President Biden. So this is one early look at a group that's going to be very, very important.
And with that group in mind, Dan, I'd like to get your thoughts about the new $50 million that the Biden campaign is putting into a new ad. It's focused on Donald Trump's felony conviction, his other convictions in other cases. The ad itself is called Character, although I don't think that word is used in the ad. How do you see that as a part of the Biden strategy, and how do you think that lands with the audience that you just outlined, or maybe the electorate more broadly?
Well, I think it's aimed at both the electorate more broadly, but certainly at the voters that we're talking about here. And I say that for this reason. One of the frustrations of the Biden campaign throughout this year is that many voters have a more favorable impression of the Trump years than they did during the Trump years. And the Biden team has been looking for ways to try to get them to reassess. And this ad that they launched today and the amount of money that they're putting behind it is very much aimed at that. They clearly highlight the conviction, but I think the underlying message is that the Donald Trump you think you know is not the Donald Trump who's running in 24. That this is somebody who does not care about you. He cares only about himself. And everything that we have seen this year, they're suggesting in the ad, points to that reality. So they're trying to refocus voters on a different Donald Trump than voters seem to think at this point.
And very quickly, Dan, at the end, as you head into covering this debate, how should voters, how are you thinking, how should voters think about this debate coming up? This is such a different kind of campaign. How should we think about it?
Well, I think it's an extension of what we're just talking about, which is will this debate in some way or another redefine the choice that people see in November, and will it force them to reassess, particularly former President Trump? But there's a gamble for President Biden in this. He must do very well in this debate to overcome some of the doubts about him.